Hey friends! Today I'm going to be sharing with you my favorite books that I read in all of 2022. Also, if my voice sounds weird or anything, I'm still getting over being sick and my voice is very painful right now, and I haven't done a lot of talking in the past like 2 weeks, so my voice is also a little rusty. So please bear with me. I'm gonna do my best to make it through this video, but I cannot wait to share with you these books. These are my absolute favorites that I read from the year. I had so many amazing 5-star books that I read this year, so I had to be very selective with this list. I believe there's only 9 books on here, but these were all the ones that just stood above the rest. And I don't really have a particular order, although there is one that is my absolute favorite, and I will save that one for the end of the video, but I'm sure if you are a frequent watcher of my channel, you will be able to guess what book it is. Actually, take a moment right now, make a guess in your head, and then at the end of the video, tell me if you were right. Also, like always, I'm doing a separate video for my favorite romances. I just always have to separate the romances out because I read so many. They need their own separate video. So if you're watching this and you're like, oh my god, where is Still Beating? My favorite romances will be coming in the next, probably the next video that I upload. All right, starting off, we have 2 books from the same author. I was trying to pick between them. I do think I have a favorite between them, but they were both standouts for the whole year. I just had to put both on the list, and that is Ashley Winstead's thrillers. The first one is In My Dreams I Hold a Knife, which I actually read back last January, and it has still stuck with me. This is one of my favorite thrillers. This one is following a group of friends in college, and while they were in college, one of the friends was murdered by another friend in the group who was convicted of that murder. Now they're at their 10-year college reunion, and the brother of the murdered victim has lured everyone back together because he thinks somebody else actually committed the murder and he wants to force them to confess. So this book, it's dual timeline where we're following them in college and then we're following them now at the college reunion, and I just loved this. This is a cast of characters where everyone sucks, and I know that's very divisive, but I really love characters like that, and especially this main character is one of my favorite main characters, especially like my favorite main character from a thriller. So I was obsessed with this. And then we have my favorite of the 2, and that is The Last Housewife. This definitely cemented Ashley Winstead as a new like all-time favorite author. Very different vibes than In My Dreams I Hold a Knife. I feel like this is a fun, not campy, but it's very like tropey. It's a very fun tropey thriller, and I can see why it doesn't work for a lot of people. This one is very dark, it's heavy, it deals with very dark themes. So this one follows these group of friends in college, and they get lured into this sex cult. And then while they're in that cult, one of the friends commits suicide, and the other 2 friends managed to escape the cult. And so now it is many years later, and one of those surviving friends finds out that the other friend who she escaped with has now also committed suicide, and she is convinced now that both of the friends were actually murdered by somebody in the cult, and she is trying to go back and investigate what happened. So this book deals with themes of suicide, sexual assault, misogyny, abuse. It's very heavy, very dark. I just loved this so much. This also has a podcast element because the main character has a friend who hosts a true crime podcast and is investigating the suicide of her friend. And so they're kind of working together to figure out what happened, and you get these podcast episodes. This is definitely like in my top 5 favorite thrillers ever. Maybe in my like top 3. Yeah. This is in my top 3 favorite thrillers ever, alongside the Mindfuck series and They Never Learn. All right, next we have The Push by Ashley Audrain. This is another book that I read back last January, and it has still stuck with me all this time. So this is a like psychological drama, basically about motherhood, generational cycles of abuse, mental health. It's about this woman who doesn't really know if she wants to be a mom, but her husband really wants kids, so they end up having a daughter, and just immediately she does not feel a bond with her daughter, and she thinks that there's something wrong with her child. She doesn't know if it's like some defect in her or if there's actually something wrong with her daughter and like that she's evil. And so this book is written as a letter from the main character to her now ex-husband, sort of explaining everything that happened. It's a very interesting book, and I loved being in this main character's mind. And it's one of those books where even up till the very last sentence, you don't know what is the truth. All right, the next one I have is, I think, the only horror on this list. I read tons of horror in 2022, and it was very, very hard for me to leave off a lot of them from this list, but this was definitely the one that I think stuck with me the most and I get the most excited when I talk about, and that is Slewfoot by Brom. So this takes place in the 1600s in Connecticut around like the witch hysteria, and it follows this woman who is an outcast of her village because she's very different. She has red hair, which people think is a mark of the devil, and when her husband dies, her brother-in-law is now trying to steal her house and her land. They have a farm and he is trying to take it from her. And so she's trying to prove that she can manage the farm by herself. If she's able to do that, then she can keep it. But every turn he is like sabotaging her. He is out to get her. And then one day she discovers that on her land there is this ancient magical tree, and under the tree is this creature named Slewfoot who takes a liking to her and now wants to help her get revenge on the people who have wronged her. This is like such an amazing revenge, witchy horror book. The vibes were amazing. It was just like everything that I have been saying that I always love, like puritanical stories, witches, the devil, revenge. It literally was just like tailor-made for me. All right, next up we have The Book of the Most Precious Substance by Sarah Gran. This one is kind of hard to genre classify, but I would call this like literary fiction, I guess. But basically this is about a woman who is a rare book dealer, and she catches wind that there is this very rare ancient book about sex rituals and magic that these very wealthy people are trying to track down and will pay a lot of money for. And so she starts investigating, trying to find this book. While she's trying to find it, she's also, you know, going around to all these different people who know information about the book, and she's acquiring all of this knowledge about the rituals and beginning to perform them, figuring out if the rituals are real or fake, if the book even actually exists. It's so interesting, and this is one of those books that like I was obsessed with, I loved, but I can totally see people hating this. It's a very weird book. It's a very like slow book where not much happens. You're really just following the main character going from like person to person and acquiring little bits of information. But this is exactly that kind of like weird lit fic style of book that I am just obsessed with. And speaking of that, another book that would perfectly fit into that weird lit fic genre, and I would completely pair these two books up together like as a recommendation. If you like one, you'll probably like the other, and that is Woman Eating by Claire Coda. This is a literary fiction book about this woman who is a vampire, and she is living on her own now for the first time ever. She's escaped her abusive mom. She's trying to make a life for herself, figure out how to supply herself with blood. It's a book about a vampire without really being about a vampire. I feel like to me this book is like a very extended metaphor for eating disorders, especially like the intersection of motherly abuse and the way that that then presents as an eating disorder in their daughters, and how moms can like pass on their own like body image and eating issues to their daughter. And you're really just in her mind, like as she's trying to figure out life, as she's trying to figure out how she's going to get blood for herself. Again, this is another book where like nothing happens. There's no plot. It's all vibes, but I was obsessed with it. All right, the next book that I have should be no surprise, and that is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldry. I talk about this book nonstop. This is a cozy fantasy book about this orc warrior who has now retired and has a dream of opening up a coffee shop. Now that she's retired, that is exactly what she decides to do. So she opens up this coffee shop in this little town where no one has ever heard of coffee before. And it's all just about her trying to have a successful business, and all of the like neighbors and the like group of friends that she acquires through this process. It is so cute and adorable. The descriptions of coffee and pastries in here are literally like mouth-watering. This is just like the perfect cozy book, and this is what made me discover exactly what I love in fantasy, and that is low stakes, cozy stories. The next book that I have is by Kingfisher, who you guys should know by now has quickly become one of my favorite authors ever. I think I read 5 or 6 of her books in 2022, and I have 2 on this favorites list. The first one is Nettle and Bone. So this is a standalone fantasy story about this girl who is the youngest princess of this little kingdom, and her oldest sister was married off to another kingdom's prince, and then she mysteriously dies. And then in order to keep up like the treaty, her next oldest sister, the middle sister, now has to marry that prince. And her sister are convinced that he murdered their oldest sister, so they need to stop him. So the main character, she goes on this quest to find this witch who is going to help her break this curse that she needs to break in order to kill the prince. And they sort of team up with this quirky cast of characters who all travel together to break this curse. This is like a dark fairy tale. It was so good. This was the first of Kingfisher's fantasy books that I read, and it has now set me up for who I think is now my favorite fantasy author ever, because these are exactly the type of fantasy stories that I love, which leads me to my all-time favorite book of the year. So let me know in the comments if you guessed it correctly, but that is Swordheart by Kingfisher. This is another standalone fantasy book. This one takes place in her world of the Clock Tower Boys. So she has other series that take place in this world, but this one specifically can be read as a standalone. And this one is like a cozy road trip, bodyguard, fantasy romance, heavy on the romance, heavier than Nettle and Bone. We're following this girl who has inherited a lot of money and a huge estate, but her family is trying to steal it from her. They're trying to force her to marry her cousin so that he can take all the money from her. But she finds this ancient magical sword, and whoever wields the sword is now protected by the immortal warrior who has been trapped inside. So this immortal warrior pops out and is now magically bound to protect her from her family and assist her on this road trip to the capital so she can find a lawyer to help her claim her inheritance. And on their journeys, their road trip, they are met with a lot of obstacles, and it is just such a fun time. It is a grumpy sunshine romance. There's so much banter. There's a quirky like found family cast of characters with different people that they meet along the road. Hala is also one of my favorite main characters because she does this thing where she just never stops talking or asking questions, and it annoys everyone around her. So the way that she like gets out of situations is she just asks so many questions that the person is like so annoyed that they just like let her get away with things. It's so funny. This is just hands down my favorite book of the year. I have not stopped thinking about it since I read it, and I can't wait to reread it. I really want to reread it and like tab it and highlight my favorite quotes and annotate it. I never annotate books, but like I actually want to annotate this. So this is definitely my favorite book of the year, one of my all-time favorite books. So those were my favorite books of 2022. Like I said, I'm going to be having another video with my favorite romances, so definitely keep an eye out for that within the next couple of days. Let me know in the comments what your favorite book of 2022 was. I had so many favorites, and I'm hoping that in 2023 I have just as many and I read just as many amazing books. So thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!